Good morning again. This is John Lomas. I'm at Upstate Alliance, and we are glad that you've chosen to tune in with us this morning for Coffee and Teleconversation. We've got a great program today. First of all, I want to thank our sponsor for this series today and for the first half of the year, Roebuck Buildings. They are sponsoring Coffee and Conversation for the first half of 2020. We have today with us our leadership with the South Carolina Department of Commerce. And I do want to say that our South Carolina Department of Commerce has just done an incredible job stepping up in light of the COVID-19 situation. From the very first, they have represented themselves incredibly, from the governor, Secretary of Commerce Hitt, Deputy Secretary Fletcher, on down. They've just really stepped up to lead the business. I want to thank them for that. And today we have the opportunity to hear how the South Carolina Department of Commerce is responding, how our existing industry has been responding, and also to hear moving forward about the Accelerate SC initiative. I know that the Department of Commerce will be having a committee meeting of Accelerate SC today. So we're going to hear more about that. Before I forget, I also want to thank all of our investors who are tuning in today, and thank you for your support of the Upstate Alliance and for your continued support. So at this point, I'm pleased to introduce Jennifer Fletcher, who is Deputy Secretary of Commerce. She also served on the staff and in leadership roles at the Upstate Alliance for 8 years. So she is one of our biggest advocates and supporters, and one of our greatest alumni. And also we have with us George Acker, who also is no stranger to the Upstate Alliance. He was served on the board, on the executive committee, and also as chairman of the organization. And we're so thankful to have him. He's the existing industry manager for 5 upstate counties for the South Carolina Department of Commerce. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to George, so we'll get started.
Thank you, John. Jennifer and I are both glad to be here, and we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to try to cover the waterfront a little bit about what has been happening, what we've been doing, and how commerce has reacted. Let me begin by perhaps laying out a little bit of a challenge for the people on this call. We've got an organization that represents 10 counties, and those 10 counties together represent a significant portion of the state's GDP. So we are very, very concerned and want to make sure that we do everything we can do to get the Upstate Alliance region up and running as quickly and as safely as possible. And what I would ask you to do as individuals, you all have an awful lot of impact on how things run, whether schools open, whether hospitality and hotel business gets up and running again, whether manufacturing plants are able to operate safely. We need to be thinking about what we each can do individually to help get this running. So let me put that out there. If you're waiting on the state to save you, we can't. We can help you, but we can't do it by ourselves. We need everybody who's on this call and the people that you represent to help us get things moving again. Let me tell you briefly what the state has been involved with over the last several months. And this is a fast-moving train. You know, a little over 2 months ago, we didn't even see this coming. So the Commerce Department is the state's lead economic development agency. And it's our job to make sure that business operates well and profitably, and that you're able to make money. We work closely with the governor's office, other partner agencies like DHEC, State Emergency Preparedness, the Attorney General's office, Department of Revenue, ports, everybody. We have staff members who attend the governor and the state EPD meetings every single day. And I think today will be our 50th report out from the Emergency Ops Center. It's our job to provide industry and business support. That's what we do. Since mid-March, we've responded to more than 2,000 inquiries from businesses across the state. most within 24 hours. Commerce's COVID-19 Business Resource Center has become kind of the clearinghouse and go-to website for any business in the state to try to find out information on how they can reopen, what they need to do, business hygiene, whether or not they're essential or non-essential. The clarification of business form that we have listed on that site can help companies determine whether they fit in one of those two categories. And so far we've vetted almost 5,800 applications. And of that, almost all were deemed essential. I think we ended up with 400 or 500 that weren't. We've had 151,000 page visits to our website, 252,000 page views. So at the local level, we've got a business service team that's pivoted to try to help people. It's amazing. People want to get a plan up and running. They want to know what to do if they end up with an employee who tests positive for COVID-19. They want to know how they clean the plant. They want to know what testing they should try to do, whether they should do temperature checks on the way in, hand washing stations, how do they disinfect the plant. We've got existing industry reps for all 46 counties, and we're in contact with those folks basically every single day, trying to find out. And there is an unbelievable number of things. I mean, things that you don't think about that we need help with. Daycare centers, half the state's daycare centers are closed. If people can't get their kids in daycare, they can't go to work. Molly Spearman, state superintendent, is working closely with the governor to determine what to do about the school year for this coming year. And so we need help trying to figure out and how we can assist the state schools in operating safely so that people can send their kids to school so they can go back to work. We have a number of companies that have contacted Commerce asking for either assistance or guidance in how they can change what they make to new things that are needed immediately, like protective equipment. So we've been working with a lot of those folks trying to figure out how they can switch over perhaps from a non-woven product to a non-woven product that can be used for face masks. So to date, we've had over 55 healthcare providers that have contacted Commerce and worked through the website for personal protective equipment, 53 companies that have asked how to resource it, 12 organizations that have donated personal protective equipment, and 146 manufacturers have been identified who can supply PPE. So we've got a lot of people who are switching gears, shifting on the fly to try to help us through this. So the bad news is we're in the middle of a tough spot. I don't think anybody who's been paying attention is going to be surprised by the fact that the state's unemployment rate has increased exponentially over the last 2 months. That's the bad news. The good news is we're a small state. We're a little over 5 million people, and we can actually move that needle when it comes to helping businesses reopen, helping schools reopen, and doing it safely. We can actually do something. So Department of Commerce has also been coordinating, with an awful lot of the financial assistance that our companies have been trying to reach. The new PPP loans, South Carolina's had 23,000, almost 23,000 loans have gone through in the first round. And that's equivalent to right at $4 billion. We've had 274 loans approved for the EIDL, that's the emergency loans to businesses for catastrophes. So there's a lot going on. It's not all perfect. The expression that I keep hearing people say, we're trying to rebuild the airplane and we're still flying it. So we're going to make some mistakes, but things are moving really, really fast. So what are we hearing locally as we go out and talk to people and talk to manufacturers? Manufacturing is generally in pretty good shape. Of course, there are going to be pockets where it's not, but it's steady in a lot of places and beginning to ramp up. Automotive is poised for a rebound. That's very sensitive to both customer confidence and logistics. Boeing has announced they're going to reopen, but I don't think it's a surprise to most of us to understand that the demand for their product has slowed based on the demands for air travel. So you got companies like Volvo, BMW thinking about reopening. Jennifer probably knows about Mercedes. So these companies will crank open, and that'll pick up all the tier 1, 2, and 3 suppliers that they have that have either been furloughed or have slowed production. Tire and other automotive suppliers will start to come back as automotive begins to open up. It's not going to be quick, but they are beginning to move again. Onshoring is a real possibility for some manufacturers in some sectors. I know the state and the federal government has been very concerned about the types of offshore manufacturing that have caused supply shortages in this country. And a little bit of a sad sector right now, hospitality and service industry. They have absolutely taken a beating, and to the extent that you can help those sectors, whether you're in the financial piece and can help them stay afloat for a while, we've got to figure out how to get customers comfortable traveling, feeling safe, staying at hotels, eating out whenever that is appropriate. There's going to be significant unemployment in that sector. As a state, we've gone from a shade under 3%, and I think in places like Greenville and Spartanburg, Anderson, slightly below 3%, to up in the teens for unemployment. So service and hospitality is going to stay tough for a while, and we need to do what we can to support those folks. And Jennifer, I think if it's okay now, I'll pitch it over to you and let you talk about what we're doing.
Sure. Thank you, George, and thanks for all the work that you and your team members have been doing to reach out to companies. I think it's very important. People feel alone and they feel like they're dealing with something that is insurmountable. So y'all's assistance has been great. Okay, so what I will kind of talk about is a little bit more about what's going on currently, and then talk about what we're going to be doing kind of moving forward to continue to move folks and move the South Carolina economy forward. So currently, I know John wanted me to touch on just in general business development activity, because I think it's a big question mark. You know, are companies still considering expansions and relocations in the middle of all this going on? So the good news in this front is the activity is certainly better than we would have imagined it being during a time like this. We're still getting, every week, we're still getting new companies to reach out to us and initiate a project. We're still working with companies who were in the pipeline before all of this really got started. So that is good. And I think hopefully some of you all are starting to see that we're actually announcing projects that have finalized their decisions. And so we're getting some good news out there. Since March 1st, our business development team has initiated 41 new projects. 31 of those 41 are new companies, and 10 are expansions. So you can see activity is still moving. It's certainly not at the levels that, you know, we're used to a year and a half or even 2 years ago. Only 2 of those projects are related to COVID-19 response, such as expansions due to making PPE or things like that. So only 2 of them. So generally it's just normal business development activity. John also asked me to look into, for you guys, to determine, are there specific industry sectors that seem to be more interested in doing something right now, maybe because of you know, market changes due to COVID-19. And really at this point, we have not seen any trends. Food and beverage, food processing was very strong before we went into this downturn, and it remains extremely strong. But again, we can't determine that that's really anything related to COVID-19. You know, certainly that will be a sector that I think everyone will watch. You know, there is some speculation on whether people will change some purchasing habits and want to have a better sense of where food is coming from, and want to know where, you know, want to be able to touch and see the farm. So we'll see if that happens. Likewise, I think from a manufacturing perspective, our manufacturers, between the tariffs last year and the year before, and now COVID-19, supply chain interruptions are at the top of mind for a lot of our manufacturers. And so will 2 incidents in a very short space of time cause manufacturers to think differently and want to pull supply chains closer, or kind of back out of the just-in-time and maybe keep a little more buffer inventory around? So those are some questions that are percolating nationally that we will certainly watch as well. With regards to just a little bit, and one more point about business development, 11 projects have been delayed due to the virus. All of these have told us they're delayed, that they're not canceling the project. We've had 1 cancellation due to the project. So I think we're all very optimistic from a business development perspective. I do think, and I'm sure you guys have all thought about this too in your own businesses, is that how we run projects and visits will change. So we are preparing for that inevitability that we're going to be doing more of these types of calls to talk to clients. Commerce recently initiated and released some funding for our local communities to do drone videos of sites and buildings, because again, I think, we're going to have less visits initially. We're going to be doing a lot more of this virtual type business development. And obviously conferences and trade shows will more than likely be canceled for the immediate future. So having to really think through how we continue to promote South Carolina, how we get in front of companies. And so I think all of that stuff we're thinking through and trying to plan for the remainder of the year and into 2021. So I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about Accelerate SC and some of the thinking about how do we not just jumpstart our economy, but get our economy back to where it was and even accelerate it from there. So the governor's initiative, Accelerate SC, is made up of 5 components. One of those components, it's titled Response, but essentially it is the business portion of the recovery effort. So and Commerce is the chair of this group. So this group is to identify challenges related to workforce capacity, workforce re-entry, critical industries, capital requirements, regulatory issues, and supply chain and logistics. We've got 9 members that represent a broad swath of different industries. We've got a small business from Spartanburg. We've got a pharmaceutical out of Lexington. We've got the South Carolina Chamber, the Manufacturers Association. We've got a restaurant chain owner, a farmer. So we've got kind of the depth and breadth that really make up our economy. We also have 10 coordinating agencies, which sounds like quite a lot, but I think those are the groups that are going to be doing the work. So PRT, the Department of Ag, the Department of Employment and Workforce, Department of Administration, Department of Revenue. So you can see it's a pretty robust group. We will be holding that group's first meeting this afternoon at 2. It will be broadcast on ETV for anyone who's interested. I've watched a couple of these, and this will be the 3rd one, and they have it down pretty well now. They've got all the sound issues fixed, so it's actually not as painful to watch maybe as the first run. It's a little bit like watching, if you've ever watched a bill being debated on the one of the floors of the General Assembly. It's somewhat like that, maybe a little less contentious. So we've had a number of conversations about how we were going to move this task force forward so that we could provide actionable recommendations to the governor. So really what we've done is we're looking at this in a couple of different tranches. Is what do we need to do immediately to restart the business community? What actions do we need to take today? And then as we continue to move through with this committee, it's going to morph into more strategic issues, dealing with, systemic unemployment that persists after, we start up the majority of businesses. As George noted, what's going to happen to our hospitality and tourism industry? Some of it's just not going to come back quickly. And what are the things we need to do either to encourage what we can encourage, and then what do we do with some of that workforce that doesn't have a job to go back to? So those are the longer term. And when I say longer term, I'm talking like 3 or 4 weeks from now, right? So it's completely changed our thinking in what's short term and what's long term. What our committee will discuss today, paramount, I think, to reopening anything in the state is, do we have a set of protocols for that particular group to go back to work? And how will they make their employees safe? How will they make customers safe? And so that will be one of the things we discuss in our group today is, CDC and OSHA have guidelines about businesses in general, but how might that apply to, a hotel, for example, a restaurant? It doesn't spell it out in real tangible situations. And so I think that's what you'll hear a lot of discussion about today is how can we take DHEC, OSHA, CDC guidelines and put that into something that our businesses can use? And then how many different types do we need to get out there? And then that begs the question is, I think you'll hear some discussion about dates in our meeting today. I don't know how extensive that will be. Obviously that is up to the governor, but I do think there will be a little bit discussion on, what might be a reasonable time frame for a few of these things that aren't open to open. The other big topic we'll address today is access to PPE. I think everybody out there that, even the Upstate Alliance, even commerce, as we think about when we're going to send our employees back to work is, what sort of PPE do we need to have available for every employee? What's going to make employees comfortable? And then obviously when you have visitors or customers. So every company, I think, has this concern. And so a discussion on, what is the state's role here in terms of helping every size company get access to PPE. Many of you have probably seen the COVID-19, the sccovid19.org website, which is a collaboration between MEP, the Hospital Association, Commerce, and SC Bio to primarily get healthcare organizations access to PPE made in South Carolina. So do we do something like that on a much larger scale for other businesses? So that's something that I think you'll hear discussed today as well. How do we do that? And this is a concern that has been brought up in a couple of the other committee meetings. I know the governance committee, which is made up of law enforcement, the universities, and the cities and towns, they all express this as a huge issue for them in restarting everything is where is that going to come from, and what's the sustainable method that we all can have it and have access to it. The third thing, if we get to it, is a general topic on workforce. So there are several issues relating to restarting the economy and workforce. Paramount, I think, is childcare. Now that we know that schools are closed for the rest of the year, and there's a huge question mark surrounding day camps and camps in general, what can we do in that arena to either encourage daycares and camps to open, or what are the other options out there? So that's a huge discussion, I think, that will occur today. Another discussion is the thought that there are employees out there with the federal $600 additional stipend, that there are employees out there who are making more today staying home than they will if they go back to work. And so what are we doing in that arena to encourage folks to go back to work before the stipend runs out? I think that's a concern of a lot of employers. Another concern is persistent unemployment, which I mentioned and George mentioned at the open. 22% of the people who have filed unemployment claims since the beginning of the crisis are not tethered to a job. So though that is a huge chunk of the South Carolina workforce that may not have a job to get back to. And so what are some of the immediate things we need to do to either get them tied to open jobs or get them some sort of online and virtual training so that they can transition maybe to another job. So that's what'll get discussed today. How far we get, I don't know, but we will certainly do our best. We've got a lot of very intelligent and experienced folks in the room to help us think through these things. Where we go from there. So the South Carolina Chamber, in conjunction with Commerce and the Accelerate SC group, has sent out a survey. And they've got about 3,000 responses so far. And many of the questions ask, what do you need if you were to reopen? What things are you missing? What are you most apprehensive about? What kind of help do you need? And so we'll have the results of that survey. And I do think that will give us some of our agenda in terms of what we need to address next to help businesses. Beyond that, what we really want to do at Commerce is we really want to understand what are the industry sectors that are not going to come out of this quickly or well. We've already talked about tourism, hospitality. I think that's a no-brainer, but are there some others we're missing? We're not thinking about? Obviously, passenger traffic is down from an airline perspective. Are there things we need to be doing to help our airports so that when things do get back to normal, we still have a very viable and functioning airport? I know how important GSP is to the community there. So what are things in that arena? Are there manufacturing sectors that aren't going to come back because consumer demand has changed? And are they in manufacturing in South Carolina, and do we need to look out for them? So that is another section that we're starting to look into. We have hired a consultant at Commerce. We've hired KPMG to help us look into that. Once they help us look into, what are the industry sectors that might be most harmed, then what we're going to do is we're going to look at what are all the federal programs out there. So it's not just the federal stimulus and the CARES Act, but a lot of federal programs have changed their guidelines to allow harm from COVID to be now an eligible reason to apply for different types of funds. So we're going to have that group look into what are all the eligible programs out there. And then what we would do is we would make sure that we communicate that to the appropriate groups. And what we would also want to do is, are there things that the state needs to do to, clear the path to help them? And then what are the gaps? Where aren't federal programs or other funding sources helpful in bringing those groups that are most harmed back up to speed? And might that be something we need to go to the governor and General Assembly and make a request? Again, I think a lot more about tourism when I talk about this, because, I get the general sense, and some of this comes from, conversations we've had with manufacturers, but I get the general sense after a short bumpy ride with the supply chain that our manufacturers will be pretty much back up and running. But it's other industry sectors that maybe aren't directly commerce day to day that I think are going to be more challenging and something we're going to need to spend some time on. So that's kind of where we'll be going in terms of helping with the recovery. And with that, I think between me and George, we've chatted for 30 minutes, and I think that leaves plenty of time for questions. So I see several questions already in queue. So I'm not sure who's reading those to us. Oh, John's here.
Yeah, we've got some questions that have come in from the audience here that I want to ask. And what I'll do is I'll throw it out, Jennifer, and then I don't know, George, some of these may be for George as well. So I guess he can come back on. and answer. But the first question, you mentioned the auto industry earlier. What are you seeing with regard to that sector picking back up?
So both, I know we've had recent conversations with Volvo and BMW. Daimler, I put in a different category because they're the delivery van, so it's not based on consumer demand. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And both of them are targeting early to mid-May to come back online. The challenge that they're having is a supply chain challenge. So they're either getting product from a state whose essential, non-essential may have shut down a supplier, or they're in that state, they're not back open yet, or it's a Mexico issue. So Mexico took a stronger stance with essential, non-essential. And we are following discussions that are occurring from the U.S. government to the Mexican authorities, and we seem to have heard that there is some movement there, that Mexico will lift some of its restrictions, but that is what's going to slow down the auto industry is supply chain. But overall, and when we talk to Volvo and BMW, they are optimistic about demand in the second half of the year. So I'll trust their predictions because they're pretty good at it.
Okay, that's great because obviously that's so important statewide.
Absolutely.
And we're looking forward to that sector getting moving. Okay, next question. What is the best guess for May 12th when the governor, I guess, would have to do another extension on the emergency declaration? What do y'all think he's going to do?
That I cannot answer. He's going to base his decision on, where we are with cases at that time. I think you all have seen he's taken a very deliberate approach, basing his information on the data and where possible. He's tried to use common sense. If businesses can follow guidelines and people can, safely distance, we should be okay. But a lot of these Accelerate SC meetings are also discussing some of these. So I think he's also taking input from those groups as well.
Okay. Another just sort of idea, but question as well, in regard to unemployment benefits. It's important to note that if work is offered to unemployed and is refused, then the SC due is supposed to disqualify them from continuing to collect benefits. However, with many COVID-19 related reasons to not return to work, this may be more complex. What are you hearing from the state in regard to that?
So again, this is one of the issues we're going to bring up today and talk through that. So I'm definitely not versed on the unemployment rules, but it was brought up by DEW, this notion of, folks might not wanting to return back. So I think it's something that we need to discuss more fully and, to the extent that it's needed, offer some suggestions to DEW about ways that we need to handle some of those concerns.
Next question. This is just sort of an idea that says, great point regarding standardizing the process of disinfecting, decontamination of buildings. CDC provides guidance, but the state needs to step forward and mandate a framework to ensure safety to workers, patrons, etc. Lots of folks are wasting money on non-CDC compliant cleanings in facilities across South Carolina. Illinois and Massachusetts are currently putting out their own SOPs. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that is exactly what our committee will talk about today. Is taking those very broad statements about workplace cleanliness and safety and trying to put them in a context like a restaurant, like a bar, like a bowling alley, things like that. And I think our goal would be to work with DHEC so that that gets kind of a stamp of approval, and then to the extent that the business could, tell people, hey, we're following these specific guidelines. I think the other thing is public and consumer trust, right? To go back out and shop and, take advantage of some of the services that these small businesses offer. We're going to have to build that back up as well. So I think a big discussion today about that, what's needed, what's already available out here, and what do we need to do? What do we need to publish and make available to folks?
Okay, shifting gears a little bit, this question says, are you seeing any interest in reshoring the manufacturing sector from China?
We haven't seen it. As I stated in my comments, I think it's probably just a little bit too soon, because what manufacturers are dealing with right now, if they're still operating, they've had to move people around, put plexiglass up, take temperatures. If they're not manufacturing, they're looking at gearing back up and getting their supply chain back on. So we haven't seen it yet in any projects that have come in, but we anticipate that there will be at least a little bit of rethinking of a supply chain, whether that's from China or even Mexico now, because, again, tariffs have scared everybody, and we were just getting past all of that when this hit. And so companies are really thinking through their supply chain.
Well, you were talking a little bit about temperature taking and things like that. What measures have you heard about, or are you anticipating to allow businesses or even governmental agencies to reopen, and you think they'll be required temperature monitoring?
So yeah, there's been a lot of talk about temperature monitoring, and I think that's a difficult one for a couple of reasons. Logistically, it's just very difficult unless you're a small office, right? So think about coming into a large office or a large manufacturer. If you've got multiple points of entry, how do you do that feasibly and quickly? Then there's the potential privacy issue that's out there. And then the third thing is, I think there's still some question about, when is somebody contagious? And I'm not a medical doctor, so, but at what point is taking a temperature, so I think that's a big debate. And it was a big debate in yesterday's protection meeting in terms of what are the things that we all should do. So, all of that stuff is still out there. In an ideal world, I think you take temperature. I think the practical world, we're going to have some other types of solutions.
Next question, remote working is likely to be a bigger part of the new normal. IT infrastructure is ever more important for all in South Carolina. How likely would state funding happen to support this?
So I'm assuming that this is really about broadband more than anything else. And this topic, broadband, has been brought up by virtually every group that has met about the virus. So obviously, Superintendent of Education Spearman has brought this up multiple times in her comments. We heard it from law enforcement as well, and it is certainly an issue that we recognize. So it is on our Accelerate SC list of topics. It's not a topic that, I said we're going to try to deal with some immediate term things, but it is on our longer term issue. So what we're hopeful for is that, there's a recommendation or, legislation that moves forward some of the broadband initiatives that were started last year and the year before. So we're hopeful that this will be one of the positives maybe that comes out of this, is that we expedite, our ability to deploy broadband, and it underscores the need for it.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's going to, as important as it was before this coming up, I think it's going to take the center.
Yeah, absolutely.
One more question. The last few years has been focused on hiring permanent staff. So are you hearing talk about employers looking toward a contingent or temporary staff model in the short term.
I haven't heard that. But if, if there's a concern out there or, something else that you want Accelerate SC to take up, I'm happy to do it, but I have not heard anything yet. I think that's probably a little too early to tell. We've got to get companies back up and running, and then some of those issues may percolate.
Okay. That's all the questions from our participants, but I would encourage more of them if we still here. And we're not going to go to commercial break, so we're going to continue to go here. But Jennifer, any other thoughts that you can think of what people and businesses in the upstate can be doing right now to continue, and what are your thoughts for how we best move out of this, after the threat is gone, and how do we remain on top as a state?
Yeah, I think George's opening comments were good. It's, we are certainly here to help from a state perspective, but you have to let us know. You have to give us some idea of what's going on. We're doing our best to, keep on top of everything going on at the state level, but I recognize that, some communities, some cities and towns are going to be, significantly adversely affected. And, even though that is being discussed on the Accelerate SC level, we're certainly concerned about that on the commerce level, because some of our rural communities who were already, damaged or not, their budgets weren't the greatest anyway. So, I just encourage you guys to let us know. We're always ready to listen. I saw 2 more questions pop up, so I thought I'd pause.
Do you have any information when the restrictions on the parks and lakes and waterways will be fully lifted?
So the only information I have on that, and I think it's been publicized, but state parks are tentatively scheduled to reopen on May 1st. But that's the only thing I have on that.
The other question was basically, let's see. Okay, if it's not already been said, you mentioned the 41 projects being considered. Any pattern to what sectors those are in?
No, they're following our typical pattern, which is, food and beverage, as I mentioned, has been in the top 2 or 3 for the last couple of years, really since we've put a strong focus on that, and that remains the same. We're still seeing automotive, component projects, distribution, office. So it's generally the same mix. No new trends since this began.
Yeah, John, if I could just weigh in on it too. One of the things that I keep hearing folks, kind of the background chatter, there are going to be opportunities coming out of this. Perhaps we don't see what those are at the moment, but there are a lot of smart people on this call and a lot of smart people in South Carolina who are looking for opportunities for niches to fill in, or gaps to invest in, or businesses to invest in. So to the extent that we can all be paying attention and look for opportunities, we talked earlier, Jennifer talked about broadband, as you mentioned. If there are incentives and there are infrastructure dollars for the installation of broadband, there's some private sector opportunities there. We just need to be looking and be mindful. And it's almost we have a duty to be looking for opportunities to help the state out right now.
Thank you, George. And I think one thing that I will say is, again, I'll reiterate that Commerce has done such a great job during this, and it's really moving the state forward. And I feel very confident that we are going to come out of this even better than we were before. We've been talking with our local developers each week on conference calls, and I think their focus has been a lot towards helping the existing industries, helping the existing businesses stay viable. And most of our manufacturers are still open, which has been a great thing. And I think we're moving forward. And what we're trying to do at the Upstate Alliance, as working, along with Commerce, is just being ready to move forward when we can, and continue to, recruit industry and market the state. So I feel very confident, but I think our leadership in South Carolina is doing a fantastic job. So thank y'all for that. Anything else from our esteemed panelists?
No, we just appreciate the opportunity to join y'all this morning. I wish I could see everybody.
I know, that's the bad thing, everybody. We do have one question.
Wash your hands.
What now?
Wash your hands.
We're gonna come out of this at some point. Capitalism, right? Somebody's going to come up with a vaccine. It just might take a little while. So
you're right, and I think there are a lot of efforts towards that. And I think we have one more question. I think that is a good one. It says, "Have you addressed agriculture in South Carolina? We've seen meat plants closing and farmers restoring crops elsewhere. How are we faring?"
I don't have any exact numbers with me, but I have had several conversations with agriculture. They are part of our Accelerate SC committee. For the most part, our folks are doing well. They're not the huge institutional farms that you're seeing out there. But what is most concerning to them is restaurant reopening, farmers market reopening. A lot of our farms sell a lot of their stuff direct to consumers, and that those opportunities have been taken away. So all of that, they're in a similar situation. Some of our manufacturers, they could get back up and running. They just need a couple of things in that direction. So generally speaking, I think our agriculture community has been doing okay. I think the opportunity, though, arises from what I mentioned earlier, is that if consumer buying habits change and they want to feel more comfortable with some of the food that they're purchasing, are they willing to buy more local? And does that help bias Grown in SC, or I'm sorry, I forget the name of their campaign, but I think that's an opportunity as we come out of this, like we talked about onshoring potentially of the supply chain. Is this another opportunity? So generally speaking, I think they're doing okay.
Yeah, and John, a lot of farmers, particularly small farmers, utilized farmers markets to get their products out to the local. I'm not sure that's a viable model going forward right at the moment. So what do we do? How do we come up with ways for local farmers to get their produce and meats and vegetables into people's hands in a different form or fashion? There's got to be a better way of doing that short term.
I agree. All right. Well, thank you. I guess we'll wrap up. Thanks again to our folks from the South Carolina Department of Commerce. Thanks to our investors for being on here today. We had a huge group today, and we're really thankful for y'all supporting the Upstate Alliance. And we will have another of the Coffee and Tele communication next week, same time, same channel. So you'll be hearing from us on that. And again, thank you so much for being with us, and see you next week.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Jennifer, George.
Thanks.